Hi, I'm Jeffrey and this is AutoAlchemy, and I want to talk today about the idea of integrating the shadow. Shadow integration is a concept from Jungian psychology, and if you're watching this video, then you probably know that Jung is the Swiss psychiatrist that gave us the basis for the 16 personalities that I often talk about on my channel. Technically, I sometimes talk about more than 16, but we won't get into that right now. Yeah, shadow integration is another concept from his school of analytical psychology or depth psychology, and it's something that's been on my mind recently. Not too long ago, a commenter actually asked me to make a video about this topic, and I want to talk about it even though my thoughts aren't fully solidified, so this will be my attempt at making sense of it. The idea of integrating the shadow is kind of a hot topic on the internet right now. There are lots of memes about it. There are lots of interpretations on what it actually looks like to integrate the shadow. And I think that there is some validity and truth in, if not all, then many of those perspectives and interpretations. But I notice that I tend to see the concept of shadow integration a little differently than a lot of people. So let me unpack my personal take. So let me start off by saying that you can connect the shadow with type, or you can treat the shadow independently of typology. And so people who think about the shadow independently of typology tend to think of it in absolute terms. So the shadow is a person's capacity to do harm, a person's capacity for aggression, for committing atrocities. The general idea in these memes that I mentioned earlier is that we all are capable of evil because we are all human beings, and we are all part of the same genetic lineage. And so you shouldn't be surprised if you have it within you to be a horrible person. If you were thrown into the Holocaust, for example, then maybe you wouldn't have been one of the good guys. And so that is supposed to be a humbling revelation. Once you know that about yourself, you can start to think critically about where you are in life right now. How might you be contributing to evil dynamics without even knowing it? And so I think that's a great revelation to have, a great thing to chew on. The only thing that I would add to that is, yes, it is your capacity to do harm, but it is in particular your capacity to do harm. And so you are going to be different from other people. Obviously, I think everybody shares certain shadowy elements, but you are going to contribute to evil in the world in a particular way, and that way is actually going to be connected to your typology. And so this brings me back to people who generally try to connect type with the idea of the shadow. And the way that I've seen it, people typically talk about the shadow in typology as being related to either your fourth function, because your fourth function is the opposite of your first function. And so you could see how maybe if the light is cast on the first function, then the fourth function is falling in the shadows and is therefore somehow charged with a little bit of evil because it is more unconscious. And that's one way of looking at it. Other people often talk about the fifth through the eighth functions as somehow being contaminated with the shadow. I am personally not somebody who sees a lot of value in an 8-function model. I am quickly moving away from an 8-function approach to the psyche. It just doesn't make sense to me. It seems redundant, and it doesn't actually connect, in my mind, with Jung's original ideas on type. I'm open-minded, but that's my official stance currently. So in any case, for me, that's a non-starter. I don't think that the shadow is actually located with or identified with functions 5 through 8. Another interesting tidbit regarding the shadow is that Jung says that to integrate the anima or the animus, which is what he uses, which is a complex that he uses to refer to the fourth function and the magic that the fourth function can contain, the rejuvenating powers of the fourth function. In order to access that function and its restorative capabilities, he says that we first need to integrate the shadow. So integrating the shadow is a step along the path to reconnecting with your soul. Again, he sees that fourth function, despite its alien nature, according to the first function in our psyches, He sees it as being a source of new life, a new perspective, but we're somehow blocked from getting there. So we have to integrate the shadow in order to make that journey. And the way that I've been seeing it is actually that integrating the shadow actually means seeing the dark side of your preferred function, or your preferred functions, or your preferred animals if you're looking at it from the objective personality lens. Our preferred functions, preferred animals, etc. are these modes of being that we overly identify with, that we sort of perform on autopilot, and it only makes sense that every mode of being is going to have its pluses and its minuses. Every mode of being is going to have some drawbacks. And so I think of integrating the shadow as having a capacity to integrate intellectually and maybe in an embodied way the dark side of your preferred mode of being. So, if you are someone who is a lead introverted thinker, then in a lot of ways, there are beautiful things about that. People who, kind of isolate from the world, people who cut off some of the outside noise of the tribe in order to dive deep intellectually and figure out a topic, those people can bring really valuable insights into the world, but they can also be assholes. They can also be a little terse. They can be, there are different ways that this can manifest ultimately, but the point is, they might be a little too concerned for personal glory, personal significance. They want to be the person to make an important contribution to whatever field they're in. This is something that I can see in myself. I involve myself in typology, and at one level I tell myself that I care about typology because it allows me to understand other people, and it allows me to think about how I want to approach the world more thoughtfully and more intelligently. But on the other hand, I also see typology as an area where maybe I can innovate and maybe I can contribute and I can somehow get my name stamped in the history books by being a contributor or innovating in some way. There's a little vanity behind that. You got to admit that. This is me integrating part of my shadow. I'm updating my worldview with that knowledge. And so I feel like there's about to be an animal attack here in the back. So like I said, the shadow is in fact a person's capacity to do harm, but again, it's your capacity to do harm. You need to think clearly about how you independently can contribute to the sum total of evil in the world. If you are a lead intuitive, what voids are you leaving in the world? In what way are you disrespecting reality because you're caught up in some sort of intuitive pattern or some possibility land? And how does that impact the people around you? What would happen to the world if everybody went all in like that and there weren't people who could accommodate and balance out that collective energy? So the visual metaphor that I think of is, if you're shining a light on your preferred functions, your savior functions in OP terminology, then there's always going to be a part of that function or that animal that isn't being illuminated. There's only going to be the focal point here, and maybe there are things you probably would benefit from seeing on the other side. And I should also say, there's this concept from the Jungian analyst Robert Johnson called the golden shadow, or the gold in the shadow. So it's not simply that the shadow contains bad things. There can also be things that you aren't seeing about yourself that are positive. People who are maybe a little deflated, a little depressed, I would say that they need to integrate the gold from the shadow. Maybe they're not seeing the positive aspects of their preferred functions. They're not seeing the ways in which they can contribute to the world using those things that put them in a flow state. But that's definitely a tangent, and that complicates things a lot. So again, back to the narrative here. If you can integrate that knowledge about the damage that you're causing because of your preferred function, if you can accept that some amount of evil is inherent to the world and inherent to the way that we behave, you can offset that a little bit. If you start to see the dark side of your saviors, then you can begin to see the positive side of your fourth function. If you see that, hey, when I'm focused on being an introverted thinker, I'm being a little bit self-isolating, I'm being a little bit of an asshole, I'm not thinking about what is appropriate according to other people, I'm existing at odds with culture, and culture isn't inherently a bad thing. Jung says that a person can't individuate on a mountain, so you need other people to exist in the world. They help you triangulate. Culture provides this web of potential roles and meanings that a person can occupy. Without other human beings, life would be kind of grotesquely straightforward and simple, in my opinion. If you can realize that there are drawbacks to your preferred way of being, then you can look to its opposite and see in what ways the opposite can actually fill those voids that you're leaving behind. Let's say INTP can say, wow, maybe there is something to focusing on other people, putting aside intellectual considerations, thinking about what is appropriate and what is inappropriate, making sure that this collective of people stays on the same page. It doesn't have to be the case that the INTP perceives a collective as a mindless mob or hive mind. There can be beauty in integrating yourself into the fabric of society. I feel like I say this more than is necessary. Like, I'm saying it as if I need to prove it to myself, or as if it's not obvious to me as somebody with demon extroverted feeling. And yeah, maybe maybe there's something to that. Maybe I need this message more than anybody. Some of you people are like, oh yeah, I know, like obviously there's value and beauty in existing in society, and we all lift each other up and we all gas each other up, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, those are my thoughts on what it means to integrate the shadow. Integrating the shadow is grasping your own capacity for contributing to the sum total of evil or harm in the universe or the world. That means you have to take a very close look with a magnifying glass on what the dark side is of your preferred way of existing in the world. What would the world look like if everybody was leaving the exact same voids that you're leaving? I think that can be an illuminating thought experiment. It's important to keep in mind that Jung said that integrating the shadow is kind of the apprenticeship on the road to development, and then the masterwork is integrating the fourth function. So anyway, that was this episode of AutoAlchemy. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any thoughts, if you have any opinions, please leave them down below. Shout out to the guy who left the original comment that gave me the idea for this video. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.